This is HOA clapback. Let me set the scene in one breath. I will not be disrespected. That is what Melissa Parker screamed at me, one hand on the clubhouse door, the other holding her handheld radio like she was about to call in an airstrike. She wore a reflective safety vest over her red light jacket, and her gray bob swung as she leaned into the doorway. Karen stood by the clubhouse door screaming that the meeting was closed and I was not allowed to witness anything. I held up my phone with the meeting notice screenshot still on the screen. No readable text visible, but the timestamp clear as day. She did not care. "This conversation is not a debate, it is a directive," she said, her voice loud enough that two neighbors stopped on the sidewalk to watch. "I am a barber in Minneapolis. I cut hair 6 days a week and hear everything that happens in Briarstone Property Owners Association before it hits the grapevine. Right now I was trying to keep my neighborhood reputation clean, and the HOA was smearing me with violations I never committed. The stakes were simple. If this stuck, I would be the guy who could not follow the rules, and in a community where certain homes get special treatment and everyone knows it, that label is poison." Melissa stepped fully into the doorway and pulled the door almost closed behind her. The clubhouse lobby went dark, except for the amber glow from the hallway sconces. She lifted the radio to her mouth and pressed the button. "I need compliance at the north entrance," she said into it, like she was dispatching actual security. I glanced past her and saw the meeting room door cracked open. Other board members visible inside, one of them looking at the floor. No one was coming to help. I stayed calm and kept my phone up. "I have a copy of the notice," I said. "It says the meeting is open to residents." She waved her free hand in a cutting motion. "That notice is outdated," she said. "We sent a corrected version yesterday." "I did not get it," I told her. She shrugged. "Not my problem. You are not on the agenda. You are not allowed in." I took a slow breath and made a note in my head. First abuse on screen, moving goalposts before I even got through the door. I stepped back and let her close the door. The lock clicked. I turned and walked toward the parking lot, pulling out my phone to check my email. Nothing. No correction, no update, no revised notice. I opened my camera app and took a wide shot of the clubhouse entrance with the timestamp visible in the corner. Then I walked to my truck and sat in the driver's seat with the door open, one work glove still on, the other in my lap. The hazy smoke from a grill nearby drifted across the lot, and I could see neighbors standing in clusters near the mailboxes, watching. One of them, a guy named Derek who always wore his arms crossed and a smirk, caught my eye and shook his head. He mouthed the words, "Same old story." I started the truck and backed out. On the way home, I called my buddy Marcus, a neighborhood security guard who worked the overnight shift and was tired of being used as muscle by the HOA board. He picked up on the second ring. "What did she do this time?" he asked. I told him about the door slam, the fake radio call, the vanishing notice. He laughed, but it was bitter. "She pulled that move on me last month," he said. "Told me to escort someone out of the gym because they were not on the approved list. I checked the list. They were on it. She just did not like them." I asked him if he still had access to the old violation logs. He paused. "Yeah," he said, "but if she finds out I showed you anything, she will try to get me fired." I told him I would keep his name out of it. He said he would think about it and hung up. That night I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I pulled up the HOA portal and logged in. The meeting minutes section loaded, but the most recent entry was from 2 months ago. The current month was listed as pending. I clicked on the violation tracker and searched my address. 2 entries appeared. The first was from 3 weeks ago, unauthorized parking in a guest spot. I had screenshots proving I was parked in my assigned spot that day, not a guest spot. The second entry was from yesterday, failure to remove holiday decorations within the required time frame. I did not have any decorations up. I took another screenshot and saved it to a folder I had started labeling Cold Case Reopen. The next morning, I went to the barber shop early and opened the drawer under the register where I keep a binder of old neighborhood newsletters and printed HOA updates. I flipped back 3 years and found a packet of meeting minutes from April. I scanned the violation log at the back. Third entry down. Unauthorized parking in a guest spot. Same wording, same format, same address block style. Different house number, but the complaint was identical, word for word. I took a photo of the page with my phone and then checked the date stamp on the file. The PDF metadata said it was created in March, 1 month before the meeting. That lined up. I kept flipping. 2 more entries, both worded exactly the same way, both from different months in the same year. All 3 were signed by the compliance officer at the time, a guy named Ron who quit the board after a messy vote and moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. I called Ron. I still had his number from when he came in for a haircut right before he left. He answered and sounded tired. "I have not thought about that place in years," he said when I explained why I was calling. I told him about the matching complaints and asked if he remembered anyone else writing them for him. He was quiet for a long moment. "Melissa wrote most of them," he said. "She would email me a draft and tell me to sign it. I thought it was normal." I asked him if he still had any of those emails. He said no, he deleted everything when he quit. But he remembered her using a template. She called it the Compliance Starter Kit. He laughed, but it was hollow. "I told you, man, that board is a scam. You should get out while you can." I thanked him and hung up. Then I opened my email and started drafting a records request to the management company. I needed 3 years of violation logs, meeting minutes, and any correspondence between Melissa and the tow company the HOA used. I knew they would stall, but I also knew the request would create a paper trail. I sent it and got an auto reply saying they would respond within 10 business days. I marked the calendar and set a reminder. 2 days later, I came home from work and found a bright orange sticker on my windshield. It was shaped like a parking boot and had bold letters across the top that said "Violation Notice" in all caps, followed by smaller text I could not read from a distance. I peeled it off and looked closer. The text said my vehicle was parked in violation of community standards and would be towed within 24 hours if not moved to a compliant location. No specifics, no rule citation, no signature, just a print date at the bottom. Today. I took photos of the sticker, front and back, and then checked my assigned parking spot. I was in it. The lines were faded but visible. My truck was centered. I walked to the clubhouse and knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. I walked around to the side entrance near the pool gate and found Melissa standing beside a golf cart, her reflective safety vest glowing in the late afternoon sun. She had the handheld radio clipped to her belt and a clipboard in one hand. I held up the sticker and asked her what rule I was violating. She glanced at it and then at me. "You know the rule," she said. I asked her to cite it. She flipped a page on her clipboard and ran her finger down a list. "Parking must be within designated lines and must not obstruct access or visibility," she read. I pointed at my truck. "I am within the lines," I said. She shook her head. "Your rear bumper is over the line," she said. I walked back to my truck with her following. I crouched and looked at the bumper. It was maybe an inch past the faded rear line, and only because the line was so worn it was hard to tell where it officially ended. I took a photo of the bumper and the line together, making sure the angle showed the full context. "This is not obstruction," I said. She crossed her arms. "This conversation is not a debate, it is a directive," she said again, louder this time. You have 24 hours. Then she turned and walked back to the golf cart. I went home and called Marcus again. He answered after 3 rings. I told him about the sticker and sent him the photos. He was quiet while he looked at them. That is not a violation, he said. I have seen way worse. She is targeting you. I asked him if he could pull the old logs now. He sighed. Meet me at the north entrance tonight at 11, he said. I will have 15 minutes before my next patrol loop. Bring a flash drive. At 11, I drove to the north entrance and parked under the community sign, a tall wooden structure with no readable text but a carved outline of a tree and the neighborhood name. Marcus pulled up in his security sedan and waved me over. He handed me a thumb drive through the window. 3 years of logs, he said. I copied everything I could access without leaving a trail. If anyone asks, you did not get this from me. I took the drive and thanked him. He looked past me toward the clubhouse. She is going to come after you hard, he said. She does not like being questioned. I told him I was ready. He shook his head. No, you are not, he said. But you will be. Then he drove off. I went home and plugged in the drive. It had a single folder labeled BPOA_VIO Lady I owns_LOG. And inside were dozens of PDFs organized by year and month. I opened the oldest file and started reading. The format was identical to the current logs: address, date, violation type, resolution. I searched for parking violations and found 23 across 3 years. 15 of them used the exact same wording Melissa had read to me earlier. I cross-referenced the dates with the meeting minutes and found that 12 of those 15 were filed in months when Melissa was listed as the compliance coordinator, even though Ron was the official signer. I made a spreadsheet and started tracking patterns. By 2 in the morning, I had a working theory. Melissa had been recycling the same complaint template for years, changing only the address and date, and using it to target anyone she wanted gone or quiet. Ron had signed them without reading them closely, and after he left, Melissa took over the role officially and kept the system going. The tow company the HOA used, a place called Metro Tow Solutions, had a dispatch log entry in one of the files that showed a request submitted by Melissa personally, not by the management company or the board president. The request was dated 2 days before the violation notice was posted on the targeted vehicle. That was the key. She was calling TOWs before she even issued the warnings. We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works, she had said in an email I found buried in one of the forwarded threads. I highlighted that line and saved it to a new folder. The next morning, I printed the spreadsheet, the email, and 5 sample violation logs that showed the identical wording. I put them in a black binder with tab dividers and labeled the spine BPOA cold case. Then I drove to the management company office, a low brick building near the highway. The receptionist asked if I had an appointment. I said no, but I needed to speak with the property manager about a records request I'd submitted. She made a call and then told me to wait. 20 minutes later, a woman in a blazer came out and introduced herself as Karen, the property manager, not the HOA board member. I clarified immediately that I was there about the HOA, not her. She looked relieved and led me to a small conference room. I opened the binder and slid it across the table. I walked her through the timeline, the matching complaints, the email where Melissa admitted to towing first, the dispatch log showing her personal request, and the pattern of selective enforcement. The property manager flipped through the pages slowly, her expression shifting from polite interest to visible concern. "This is a serious allegation," she said. I told her I was not alleging anything. I was showing her the documents. She closed the binder and leaned back. "We will need to investigate this internally," she said. "How long?" I asked. She did not answer right away. 2 weeks, Maybe 3, she said. I told her I did not have 3 weeks. The tow notice on my truck gave me 24 hours, and that deadline was in 6 hours. She frowned. I cannot stop a tow that is already scheduled, she said, but I can put a hold on any new enforcement actions while we review this. I asked her to put that in writing. She hesitated, then printed a 1-page memo on her office letterhead and signed it. I took a photo of it with my phone before I left. I drove back to my apartment and checked my truck. The sticker was still there, and now there was a second one next to it. Same design, same print date, but a different timestamp. I took photos of both and then called the tow company directly. A man answered and I asked if they had a tow scheduled for my address. He put me on hold, then came back and said yes, scheduled for 4 p.m. today. I asked who requested it. He said the HOA board. I asked for a name. He said he could not release that information. I told him I had documentation showing the request might be fraudulent and asked him to delay the tow until I could provide it. He sighed. Look, man, we just do what the HOA tells us, he said. If you have a problem, take it up with him. Then he hung up. At 3:45, I was standing beside my truck with my phone recording. At 3:58, a flatbed tow truck pulled into the lot. The driver got out, looked at my truck, and then looked at me. You the owner? He asked. I said yes. He pulled a clipboard from his cab and flipped through the pages. I got an order to tow this vehicle for parking violations, he said. I asked him who signed the order. He showed me the top sheet. It was a carbon copy form with a signature at the bottom, but the name was not Melissa Parker. It was Ron Feldman, the guy who quit 3 years ago. I took a photo of the form over his shoulder and then showed him my phone. Ron Feldman has not been on the board for 3 years, I said. This is a forged request. The driver squinted at the form and then at me. I do not get paid enough for this, he said. He pulled out his phone and called his dispatch. A minute later, he hung up and told me the tow was canceled pending verification. He got back in his truck and left. I sat in my truck and replayed the video I had just recorded. The form was clear enough to see the signature, and I had the driver on camera saying Ron's name out loud. That was evidence, concrete and time-stamped. I texted Marcus and told him what happened. He replied immediately, "She is going to lose it when she finds out." I told him I was counting on it. That night I went to the barbershop and called Ron again. I told him about the forged tow request with his signature. He was quiet for a long moment. I never signed anything for parking, he said. I only did violation logs for the meetings. Someone is using my name. I asked him if he still had any blank forms or templates he used when he was on the board. He said no, but Melissa had access to everything. She kept a file cabinet in the clubhouse office with old board documents, he said. If someone wanted to forge something, that is where they would start. I asked him if he would be willing to write a statement saying he did not authorize the tow request. He said yes, and asked me to email him the photo of the form. I did, and he replied an hour later with a signed statement on a scanned letterhead. The next morning I went to the post office and mailed a certified letter to the HOA board, the management company, and Melissa Parker personally. Inside I included printed copies of the forged tow request, Ron's statement, the dispatch log showing Melissa's personal call, and the email where she said they could tow first and explain later. I kept the tracking numbers in my phone and set reminders to check delivery status. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered and a woman introduced herself as the assistant manager at the management company. She said they had received my letter and were opening a formal investigation into the enforcement procedures. She also said Melissa Parker had submitted a counter-complaint, accusing me of harassment and filing false reports. I asked her what the false reports were. She said Melissa claimed I had doctored the documents and that Ron's statement was coerced. I told her I had the original files and could provide metadata and timestamps for everything. She said she would add that to the file. Then she told me the board had scheduled an emergency meeting for the following week, and I was invited to attend. I asked if it was open to residents. She said yes, but I would need to submit any materials I planned to present at least 48 hours in advance. I told her I would. That afternoon, I went back to the clubhouse and tried the door, locked again. I walked around to the pool entrance and found Melissa standing by the gate with her clipboard and radio. She saw me and immediately lifted the radio to her mouth. "I need compliance at the pool gate," she said into it. I stopped 10 feet away and held up my phone. "I am recording this," I said. She lowered the radio and glared at me. "You are harassing me," she said. "I am standing in a public area of the community," I said. She stepped closer. "This conversation is not a debate. It is a directive," she said for the third time. "You are not allowed to film me without my consent." I told her Minnesota is a one-party consent state, and I was allowed to record any conversation I was part of. She turned and walked toward the clubhouse, shouting over her shoulder, "You are going to regret this." I saved the video and went home. That night I drafted a presentation for the meeting. I included the timeline, the documents, the metadata, and a summary of the pattern. I kept it under 10 pages and made sure every claim was backed by a cited source. Then I emailed it to the management company with the subject line "Materials for Emergency Meeting." I got a read receipt 3 minutes later. The next few days were quiet, which made me nervous. No new stickers, no new emails, no calls. I kept checking the HOA portal, but nothing changed. Then, the day before the meeting, I got an email from the management company saying my submission had been received, but there was a formatting issue and I needed to resubmit it as a PDF instead of a Word document. I checked my sent folder. I had sent a PDF. I replied and attached the same file again, this time with a screenshot of the original sent message showing the file type. An hour later, I got another email saying they had received the resubmission and it would be included in the board packet. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the tow yard standoff scene where I show the paperwork gap and the clerk refuses to keep cooperating. One of the set pieces I knew was coming. I had not been to the tow yard yet, but I had a feeling I would need to go soon. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to Metro Tow Solutions. The yard was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, and the office was a small trailer near the gate. I parked and walked in. A man in a stained shirt sat behind a desk covered in clipboards and coffee cups. I told him I was there to ask about a tow request that had been submitted under a forged signature. He looked at me like I had just asked him to solve world hunger. "We do not handle that," he said. "You need to talk to the HOA." I told him I had documentation proving the request was fraudulent and I wanted to know what their policy was for verifying signatures. He leaned back in his chair. "Look, man, if the HOA sends us a request, we do it," he said. "We do not have time to check every signature." I asked him if he kept copies of the requests. He pointed to a file cabinet in the corner. "Everything is in there," he said, "but you are not allowed to look at it without a subpoena." I thanked him and left. On the way out, I took a photo of the yard entrance and the company sign with no readable text visible. Then I sat in my truck and made a note. Tow company does not verify signatures, relies entirely on HOA trust. That was a weak link, and I planned to use it. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the clubhouse main room. I arrived at 6:45 and found the parking lot already half full. I parked near the entrance and grabbed my binder. Inside, the room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Melissa was at the far end, her reflective safety vest draped over the back of her chair, her handheld radio on the table in front of her. She saw me walk in and her expression hardened. The property manager was seated at the near end of the table, and she gave me a polite nod. I sat in the second row and opened my binder on my lap. At 7, the board president called the meeting to order. He was a thin man in a polo shirt who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He read through the agenda quickly, skipping over the usual committee reports and jumping straight to new business. He said the board had received a formal complaint regarding enforcement procedures and a counter-complaint regarding harassment and false reporting. He said both would be addressed tonight. Then he looked at me and asked if I wanted to present first. I said yes. I stood and walked to the front of the room. I opened my binder and placed it on the table so the board members could see the dividers. I started with the timeline, 3 years of identical complaints, all filed in months when Melissa was the compliance coordinator. I showed them the email where she said they could tow first and explain later. I showed them the dispatch log with her personal phone number. Then I showed them the forged tow request with Ron's signature and the statement from Ron saying he never authorized it. I spoke slowly and kept my tone even. I did not accuse anyone of anything. I just presented the documents and let them speak. When I finished, the room was silent. The board president looked at Melissa. "Do you have a response?" he asked. Melissa stood and picked up her radio, holding it like a prop. "This is a coordinated attack," she said. "He has been harassing me for weeks, filming me without consent, spreading lies about my record, and now he is trying to destroy my reputation with doctored documents." I asked her which documents were doctored. She pointed at the email. "That email is out of context," she said. I was describing our standard procedure, not admitting to anything illegal. I asked her to explain the standard procedure. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at the board president. "I do not have to defend myself to him," she said. "This conversation is not a debate, it is a directive." One of the other board members, a woman in a cardigan, raised her hand. "I have a question," she said. "If the procedure is standard, why is Ron's name on a tow request from last week when he left the board 3 years ago?" Melissa did not answer. The board president flipped through the packet in front of him and found the page with the forged request. He stared at it for a long moment. "This does look irregular," he said. Melissa grabbed the radio and pressed the button. "I need compliance at the meeting room," she said into it. No one responded. She tried again. Still nothing. Marcus was not on duty tonight. The property manager spoke up. "We have reviewed the documentation provided by both parties," she said. "Our preliminary finding is that there are significant inconsistencies in the enforcement records, and we recommend an independent audit of all violation logs and tow requests for the past 3 years. She looked at Melissa. "We also recommend that you step down from the compliance coordinator role pending the outcome of the audit." Melissa slammed the radio on the table. "You do not have the authority to remove me," she said. The property manager did not flinch. "The management contract gives us the authority to suspend board members who pose a liability risk," she said. "This is a suspension, not a removal. The board can vote to reinstate you after the audit is complete." The board president called for a vote. 3 members voted yes, 1 voted no, and Melissa abstained. The motion passed. Melissa stood and grabbed her radio and clipboard. "This is not over," she said. Then she walked out. The door slammed behind her. After the meeting, I stayed to talk to the property manager. She told me the audit would take 4 to 6 weeks, and I would receive a copy of the findings. She also told me that any enforcement actions against me were suspended until the audit was complete. I thanked her and left. On the way out, I saw Derek. the neighbor with the smirk standing near the door. He gave me a nod. "About time someone stood up to her," he said. The next 2 weeks were quiet again, but this time it felt different. No stickers, no emails, no radio calls. I went to work, came home, and checked the portal every night. The violation entries against me were still there, but they were marked as under review. Then, on a Thursday morning, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. I answered, and a man introduced himself as an investigator with the City Code Enforcement Office. He said he had received a complaint about HOA overreach and selective enforcement in Briarstone, and he wanted to schedule a time to walk the property and review the records. I asked him who filed the complaint. He said it was anonymous, but included detailed documentation. I had a feeling I knew who filed it, but I did not say anything. We scheduled a walkthrough for the following Monday. On Monday, I met the investigator at the north entrance. He was a middle-aged man in a polo shirt with a city ID badge clipped to his belt. He carried a tablet and a digital camera. We walked through the parking lots first, and he took photos of the faded lines, the guest spots, and the signage with no readable text visible. Then we went to the clubhouse, and he asked to see the violation logs. The property manager led us into the office and pulled the file cabinet open. The investigator spent an hour flipping through folders and taking notes. He did not say much, but his expression got more serious as he went. When he finished, he thanked the property manager and told her he would send a formal report within 30 days. 2 weeks later, the report arrived. It was 12 pages long and included photos, timestamps, and a summary of findings. The key points were clear. The HOA had been enforcing rules selectively, using inconsistent standards, and failing to document appeals or provide due process. The report also noted that the tow request with Ron's signature appeared to be fraudulent and recommended that the HOA adopt a clear enforcement policy with a neutral appeal process and proof standards. The investigator concluded by saying that the current system posed a liability risk and could result in legal action if not corrected. I printed 3 copies and mailed one to the board, one to the management company, and one to my attorney. My attorney was a woman named Lisa who specialized in HOA disputes. I had consulted with her after the first tow attempt, and she had been following the case from a distance. When she read the report, she called me immediately. "This is gold," she said. "If they do not fix this, we can file in small claims and win." I asked her what the timeline looked like. She said we could file within the next 2 weeks and have a hearing within 60 days. I told her to draft the paperwork. In the meantime, I kept gathering evidence. I went back to the thumb drive Marcus had given me and cross-referenced every violation log entry with the meeting minutes. I found 23 entries that had been filed but never appeared in the minutes, meaning they were never officially reviewed or approved by the board. I also found 6 entries where the violation date was listed as before the rule was adopted, which meant they were backdated. I added all of this to the binder and labeled a new tab Procedural Violations. Then I got a text from Marcus. He said Melissa had been asking around about who gave me the files. He said she was threatening to file a complaint against anyone who leaked internal documents. I told him to stay quiet and let me handle it. He said he would, but he was worried. I told him the investigator's report had covered most of the same ground, so even if she found out, it would not matter. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji and went offline. The next day, I got an email from the management company. It was short and formal. The board had voted to adopt a new enforcement policy in line with the investigator's recommendations, and all pending violations were being dismissed pending re-review under the new standards. I replied and asked for confirmation that the violations against me were dismissed. I got a response an hour later, confirmed. I printed the email and added it to the binder. But I was not done yet. I still had the trump card. and I was waiting for the right moment to use it. I waited for the right audience, because the reveal needed witnesses. That moment came 3 weeks later when the board scheduled a special meeting to vote on the new enforcement policy. The meeting was open to residents, and I made sure to arrive early. The room was packed, standing room only, and I saw faces I recognized from the parking lot and the mailbox clusters. Derek was there, arms crossed, smirk in place. Marcus was there too, off duty, standing near the back wall. Melissa was seated at the board table, her reflective safety vest on, her radio in front of her. She did not look at me when I walked in. The board president called the meeting to order and started reading the proposed policy changes. It was dry, procedural, and took 20 minutes. When he finished, he opened the floor for comments. I raised my hand. He called on me. I stood and walked to the front with my binder. I placed it on the table and opened it to the tab labeled Trump Card. Inside was a printout of a tow company dispatch log that showed Karen requested the tow without legal authority. The log included timestamps, a phone number, and a recording transcript where Melissa identified herself by name and gave her board title. I had gotten the log 2 weeks ago after my attorney subpoenaed the tow company's records. I had not shared it with anyone yet, because I wanted to save it for this moment. I handed copies to Marcus first, then we presented together so Karen could not isolate me. I gave one to the board president, one to the property manager, and one to the attorney the HOA had hired to review the new policy. Then I read the key section out loud. The request was made at 11 p.m. on a weekday, hours after the compliance office was closed, and the caller used a personal cell phone instead of the HOA's official line. The transcript showed Melissa saying, "I need this done tonight, no exceptions," and the dispatcher asking if she had board authorization. Melissa replied, "I am the board. Just do it." The room went silent. The board president stared at the page. The property manager closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. Melissa stood up, her face red, and grabbed her radio. "This is defamation," she said. "I am going to sue you for every dollar you have." I stayed calm and pointed to the timestamp on the log. "This was recorded by the tow company, not by me," I said. "If you want to sue anyone, sue them." She turned to the board president. "Are you going to let him do this?" she asked. The board president looked at the attorney. The attorney flipped through her copy of the log and then looked up. "If this is accurate, it is a serious breach of fiduciary duty," she said. "The board needs to address this immediately." Melissa tried to respond, but the board president cut her off. "We are going to take a 10-minute recess," he said. "Board members, please join me in the side office." They filed out, leaving Melissa standing alone at the table. She looked around the room, saw the neighbors watching her, and then grabbed her radio and walked out. I sat down and waited. When the board came back, the president announced that Melissa Parker was being removed from the board effective immediately, and the board was referring the matter to their attorney for further action. He also announced that the new enforcement policy was being adopted unanimously, and all previous violations filed under the old system were being expunged from the record. He apologized to me personally and said the board would cover my legal fees and any costs associated with the dispute. The room erupted in applause. Derek whistled. Marcus gave me a nod. After the meeting, I stayed to talk to the property manager. She told me the attorney would be in touch about the fee reimbursement and that the board was considering filing a complaint against Melissa with the state regulatory board. She also told me that several other residents had come forward with similar complaints after the investigator's report went public, and the management company was conducting a full review of all enforcement actions from the past 5 years. I told her I appreciated the transparency and asked her to keep me updated. She said she would. Outside, Derek caught up with me in the parking lot. "That was the most satisfying thing I have seen in years," he said. "How long were you sitting on that dispatch log?" I told him 2 weeks. He laughed. "You played her perfectly," he said. "She thought she was untouchable." I told him no one is untouchable if you have the right evidence. He asked me if I was going to stick around or move out now that it was over. I told him I was staying. The neighborhood was worth fighting for, and now it had a chance to be what it should have been all along. A month later, I got a check from the HOA for my legal fees and costs. It was more than I expected, but Lisa had been thorough. I deposited it and used part of it to take Marcus out for dinner. We went to a steakhouse downtown, and he told me he had been promoted to a lead shift supervisor after the board meeting. Apparently, the board wanted to show they were serious about transparency, and they asked him to help train the new compliance coordinator on proper procedures. He said it was weird being on the inside, but he liked it. I told him he earned it. The new enforcement policy went into effect 2 months later. It included a clear appeal process, a requirement that all violations be documented in the meeting minutes, a neutral third-party review for disputes, and a ban on personal phone calls to vendors for enforcement actions. The board also voted to hire an independent auditor to review the HOA's financials, and the audit found several irregularities in the reserve fund that led to another investigation. Melissa was not involved in that one, but the ripple effect was real. As for Melissa, I heard through the grapevine that she moved out of the neighborhood 3 months after the meeting. No one knew where she went, and no one asked. Her house sold fast, and the new owners were quiet and friendly. The reflective safety vest and the handheld radio were never seen again. I kept the binder on a shelf in my apartment, and every now and then I would flip through it and remember the timeline. The matching complaints, the forged signature, the dispatch log, the meeting where it all came together. It was not just about winning. It was about proving that the system could work if you forced it to. The HOA lost in small claims, paid my costs, and was forced to adopt a clear enforcement policy with a neutral appeal process and proof standards. Karen's own selective enforcement got documented in the minutes, and a city inspector confirming what the HOA cannot enforce became part of the public record. Karen confidently read the wrong rules section out loud during one of the early confrontations, and that moment became evidence of her pattern of making things up as she went. I still cut hair 6 days a week, and I still hear everything that happens in Briarstone before it hits the grapevine. But now the stories are different. People talk about the new board, the fair enforcement, the transparency. They talk about how someone finally stood up and made it right. I do not take credit in public, but in the shop, when a customer brings it up, I smile and nod. Sometimes that is enough. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more neighborhood justice tales. One afternoon, about 6 months after everything settled, I was closing up the shop when a woman walked in. She looked familiar, but I could not place her. She introduced herself as a reporter with a local news blog and said she had heard about the Briarstone case. She asked if I would be willing to talk about it on the record. I told her I would think about it. She handed me her card and left. I never called her back. The story was over, and I did not need to relive it in public. The binder on my shelf was proof enough. But the neighborhood remembered. A year later, when the board held elections, 3 of the old members stepped down and were replaced by residents who had been at that meeting. The new board president was Derek, the guy with the smirk and the crossed arms. He told me he ran because he wanted to make sure what happened to me never happened to anyone else. I told him I appreciated that, and I voted for him. He won by a landslide. The compliance coordinator role was restructured entirely. Instead of one person with unchecked authority, it became a committee of 3 residents and 1 management company rep. They met once a month, and all decisions were recorded in the minutes and posted on the portal within 48 hours. The tow company contract was renegotiated to include signature verification and a mandatory 24-hour notice period before any vehicle could be removed. The changes were small, but they added up. I kept working, kept living, kept cutting hair. The neighborhood settled into a new rhythm, one where the rules made sense and the enforcement was fair. People stopped looking over their shoulders when they parked. They stopped worrying about vindictive notices and arbitrary fines. It felt like a real community again, and that was worth every hour I spent building that binder. 2 years after the meeting, I got a message from Ron. He had heard about the outcome and wanted to thank me for clearing his name. He said he had been worried that the forged signature would come back to haunt him, but the investigator's report and the board's actions had put it to rest. He asked if I wanted to grab a beer sometime. I said yes, and we met at a place near his new neighborhood. He told me he was happy where he was, and he had no intention of ever joining another HOA board. I told him I did not blame him. We talked for a couple hours, mostly about life and work, and then we went our separate ways. It was good closure. The binder stayed on my shelf, but I stopped opening it. I did not need to. The story was in my head, every detail, every moment. The cold open at the clubhouse door, the stickers on my windshield, the tow truck driver reading the forged form, the dispatch log reveal at the PAC meeting, Melissa slamming her radio on the table, the applause when the board announced her removal. It was all there, vivid and real, and it always would be. But more than the story, I remembered the feeling of standing in that meeting room, holding the dispatch log, knowing I had won. Not because I destroyed someone, but because I forced the system to work the way it was supposed to. That feeling was something I carried with me every day, a quiet confidence that came from knowing I could fight back when I needed to, and I could win. The neighborhood kept growing and changing. New families moved in. Old ones moved out. The board kept meeting, kept making decisions, kept posting the minutes. The compliance committee kept reviewing violations and issuing warnings. The tow company kept verifying signatures. It was not perfect, but it was better. And that was enough. Marcus and I stayed in touch. He kept working security, kept helping the compliance committee, kept being a bridge between the board and the residents. He told me once that he felt like the neighborhood had turned a corner, and he was proud to have been part of it. I told him he was more than part of it. He was the reason I had the evidence to fight back in the first place. He shrugged and said he was just doing his job. But I knew better. He took a risk, and it paid off for everyone. The attorney, Lisa, moved on to other cases, but she checked in with me every few months. She said the Briarstone case had become a template for her practice, and she used the binder and the dispatch log as examples when she taught seminars on HOA disputes. She asked if I minded her sharing the story, and I told her to go ahead. If it helped other people stand up to bad boards, it was worth it. The property manager, the one who put the hold on enforcement actions and pushed for the audit, was promoted to a regional role. The management company sent a new rep to Briarstone, and she was young and eager and took the new policy seriously. The transition was smooth, and the board appreciated the continuity. I met with her once to go over the history, and she took notes like she was studying for a test. I told her the most important thing was to stay consistent and document everything. She said she would. The tow yard clerk, the one who shrugged and told me he did not get paid enough for this, quit his job 6 months after the standoff. I heard he went to work for a construction company and was much happier. I never saw him again, but I hoped he was doing well. He had been caught in the middle, and he made the right call when it mattered. One night, about 3 years after the meeting, I was at the barber shop late, cleaning up after a long day. A guy came in for a walk-in cut, and we started talking. He told me he lived in a different part of Minneapolis, and his HOA was giving him trouble over a fence that was supposedly 2 inches too tall. He asked me if I had any advice. I told him to document everything, get the measurements verified by a neutral third party, and never back down if he was in the right. He asked me how I knew so much about HOA disputes. I smiled and told him I had been through it. He asked if I won. I said yes, and I left it at that. He thanked me and left a big tip. That moment reminded me why the fight mattered. It was not just about me. It was about setting a precedent, proving that residents could push back, and showing that the system could change if enough people demanded it. The binder on my shelf was not just a record of my case. It was a blueprint for anyone who needed it. The cold case I reopened turned out to be bigger than I thought. The identical complaints, the forged signatures, the backdated notices, the personal tow requests, they were all part of a pattern that had been running for years. Melissa had built a system where she could target anyone she wanted, and no one had questioned it until I forced them to look. The investigator's report, the dispatch log, the audit, the policy changes, they were all pieces of the same puzzle, and they all pointed to one conclusion. Power without accountability always corrupts, and the only way to stop it is to shine a light on it. I thought about that a lot in the years that followed, about how easy it would have been to just move out, to let Melissa win, to avoid the fight. But I did not, and the neighborhood was better for it. The rules were fair now. The enforcement was transparent. The board was accountable. It was not perfect, but it was honest, and that made all the difference. The mail carrier who confirmed a delivery window and helped me photograph the envelope before it was lost also played a quiet role in the case. She had noticed the pattern of missing mail and started keeping her own log of deliveries to my address. When I asked her for help, she showed me her records, and they matched my suspicions. That log became part of the evidence, and it helped prove that Melissa had been intercepting notices to cover her tracks. The mail carrier never wanted credit, but I made sure the investigator knew about her contribution. She was transferred to a different route a year later, and I heard she was doing well. The funny karma beat came during one of the early confrontations, when Melissa tried to cite a rule about parking and confidently read the wrong section out loud. She had pulled up the rule book on her phone and started quoting a passage about guest parking, but the rule she read was actually about overnight RV storage. I pointed it out, and she got flustered and tried to backtrack, but the neighbors who were watching started laughing. It was a small moment, but it was the first crack in her armor, and it set the tone for everything that followed. The side complication, when a witness changed their story after Karen cornered them in private, almost derailed the case. The witness was a neighbor who had seen Melissa placing the first sticker on my windshield. He agreed to give a statement, but after Melissa talked to him, he called me back and said he was not sure what he saw anymore. I did not push him, but I made sure to document his original statement and the timeline of when he changed his mind. That timeline became part of the pattern of intimidation, and it helped the investigator understand how Melissa operated. The time pressure, when the mail carrier confirmed a delivery window and I had to photograph the envelope before it was lost, was one of the most stressful moments of the entire case. I had exactly 2 hours to get to the mailbox cluster, wait for the delivery, and photograph the envelope before Melissa could intercept it. I made it with 10 minutes to spare, and the photo showed the postmark and the delivery timestamp clearly. That envelope contained a notice of a hearing that I was never supposed to see, and the photo proved Melissa had been hiding correspondence. The portal outage scene, when my documents vanished and I showed my sent timestamps anyway, was one of the two major set pieces. It happened a week before the emergency meeting. I logged into the HOA portal to check the status of my records request, and the entire system was down. I called the management company, and they told me the portal was undergoing maintenance and would be back online in 48 hours. But when it came back, my submission was gone. No record of the email, no record of the attachments, nothing. I had screenshots of the sent message with the timestamp, and I had the read receipt, so I printed them all and brought them to the management company office in person. The property manager looked uncomfortable when I showed her the evidence, but she could not deny it. She promised to investigate, and a week later she confirmed that someone with board-level access had deleted my submission. That someone was Melissa. The tow yard standoff, when I showed the paperwork gap and the clerk refused to keep cooperating, was the other major set piece. It happened after the forged tow request was canceled. I went back to the tow yard to get a copy of the request from my records, and the clerk told me he could not release it without HOA authorization. I showed him the investigator's report and the management company's memo suspending enforcement actions. He read them slowly, then looked at me and said, "I am not getting in the middle of this." He handed me a copy of the request form, and I saw that the signature did not match any of the samples I had from Ron. The clerk saw me staring at it and said, "Look, we just do what they tell us. If the signature does not match, that is their problem, not ours." Then he told me to leave. I took the form and left, and that form became the smoking gun in the final showdown. The showdown at the community entrance sign area, where neighbors stopped to watch, was the final moment. After the board meeting, Melissa tried to leave through the side exit, but a group of neighbors had gathered near the entrance sign to talk about what had just happened. She walked past them, and someone called out, "Hey, Melissa, how does it feel to lose?" She stopped, turned, and started yelling about defamation and lawsuits. Marcus stepped between her and the crowd and told her to leave. She tried to push past him, but he did not move. Finally, she gave up and walked to her car. The crowd watched her drive away, and then they cheered. It was not planned, and it was not organized, but it was the perfect ending to the story. The HOA lost in small claims and paid costs. Karen's own selective enforcement got documented in the minutes. A city inspector confirmed what the HOA could not enforce. Karen confidently read the wrong rules section out loud. Those 4 beats, exactly as they were seated, became the foundation of the payoff. They were not just random moments. They were the result of months of work, careful planning, and a refusal to back down. And they worked. I still live in Briarstone. I still cut hair. I still hear the stories. But now the stories are about a neighborhood that works, a board that listens, and a system that is fair. The binder on my shelf is a reminder of how hard it was to get here, but it is also a reminder that it was worth it. Every page, every document, every timestamp, they all added up to something bigger than the sum of their parts. They added up to justice. And justice, as it turns out, is not just about winning. It is about making sure the system works for everyone, not just the people with power. It is about standing up when it is hard, speaking up when it is risky, and fighting back when it is necessary. It is about refusing to accept corruption, refusing to tolerate abuse, and refusing to let bad actors get away with it. That is what the cold case was really about. Not just reopening an old file, but proving that the past does not have to define the future. Take care, and thanks for watching.